Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where it's about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Peripheral. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Do you notice I constantly struggle with the title. Like, peripheral is one of those words I just can't say. Once again, it always sounds like mush in my mouth. I kind of slur it out every time I try and say it. Either way, I digress. Let's start off with Tommy's situation, which I thought was so fascinating. Obviously, like, he's kind of getting super gaslit because it's like, right, he turned those cards into evidence and it's like, they just up and disappeared. It's like, I don't see any paperwork from them. I was like, and now in retrospect, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because I was like to say, like, wait, how did the person who grabbed Bob, I'm like, how'd you get the title? I was like, because I was assuming, like, whoever grabbed Bob grabbed him for the purposes of, like, right, they were hired to grab him and stuff like that. But I'm like, yeah. Why not kill Tommy? It's like, well, I get it. He's a cop. It would draw too much attention. Leaving him alive draws too much attention. But, like, he's being gaslit at work. And it's like, there's no paperwork. Oh, invisible cards. It's like, yeah, technology's at a very heightened place in 2032. But, who knows where on the timeline camouflage or invisible cards come into play, you know? I mean, a lot can happen in that 70 years. So we have no idea in that 7-year timeline, like, when that happened. But Tommy's boss is basically telling him, like, I love that metaphor. He's like, oh yeah, what was it? It was a grandfather that taught him that metaphor, just like, right, if you're walking on top of eggs, don't hop. So it's like, yeah, you don't want to burn yourself out too quickly because you've always been like kind of like had this spark inside of you I've always found fascinating. And then I love that he's like, oh, I got to take care of some business. I was like, Tommy's up here bleeding and like washing up his face from all the cuts and bruises. And then the guy goes in there pissed. I was like, and Tommy looks in the mirror. At first I thought Tommy's like, wait, did you just go in the bathroom while I was? But then he starts whistling and then Tommy notices his shoes. I was like, oh, because I figured that was an important detail, but I didn't expect him to literally find out the beginning of the next episode about that. Well, not the beginning, but you get what I'm saying? It's like, oh, that was revealed super fast. I expected that to kind of maybe another episode or so that would come out. Didn't expect it to be like near the beginning of the next episode. We'd be like, yo, so the sheriff is behind it. And that's what I was saying earlier, because it's like, right, he did bring in those invisible cards, and well, it makes sense why the paperwork disappeared because he utilized it. But it's like, well, how would he know to utilize it? So, because we ultimately end up finding out the person who took Bob, it's Corbell, which I was immediately like, wait, because I was under the impression, wait, did Corbell work with the future people with the Research Institute to grab Bob? But it seems like no. The reason why Corbell grabbed Bob is because Bob is basically doing the job he was hired to do. But basically, that's it. The Research Institute was like, you're not getting us results fast enough, so they double booked the job. And Corbell's like, right, who's basically fucking up the situation I'm trying to make work for myself? You know, it's like, I guess it's also like, because he's not killing the Fishers like he was supposed to, because he struck a deal with Burton. So I guess for him, it's like, right, this is, I found a sweet spot situation for me. Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the situation with my nephew, but like, why are you fucking this up? Like, you know, he doesn't know, because Bob was like, wait, are you the one that hired me? So they didn't have the conversation, but they were both hired by the same person. They must have found out, you know, obviously they had the future, so they're from the future, so they know like what Corbell is doing. It's like, right, he's not killing the Fishers like he should. He's making a monetary gain by like keeping the peace with them. So it's, you know, I even love how that whole thing with Bob played out, and I love the whole metaphor. But basically it came down to, are you the type of person that, hey, you just accept things as they are, you believe, you take someone's word of like, oh, just kind of accept, oh, you got this collar around your neck, better not do anything? Or are you the type of person that's like, oh, someone tells you that stove is going, like, you're like, oh, I got to touch this stove, and it's not till you get your hand burned that you learned your lesson. It's like, there are two different type of people, and it's like, oh, in that moment, turns out he's the latter. He's like, oh, I got to touch the stove and burn my hand to realize not to do that again, you know? But turns out he's more stubborn than that, because he was looking for his opportunity. Because like when he was trying to break open the fish tank, I was like, what's that going to do for you in the long run? Because I was like, not unless you're planning on it short-circuiting the remote or something like that. But it's like, no, he knew he was in a situation. She tried to electrocute him. He grabbed on her. The current's going to flow through her too. So I guess that was kind of what he was hoping for. Like that with the conjunction of the water, I think. Well, because water's not, oh God, what's the word I'm thinking of? water doesn't actually conduct electricity. The only reason why water conducts electricity is because you are in it conducting electricity. I could be completely wrong on that. That's always been my understanding, but like, God, I'm not the science guy. I'm an idiot, so don't take my words on it. Like, God, high school was over a decade ago for me, so like, yeah. So I don't remember, but it's like, yeah, because like, I don't think water conducts electricity. It only happens like that. It seems like it's because you are in it, and hence, you're the one that's conducting electricity. You're the one that kind of, either way, tangents and all that aside, Bob kind of snaps to it, so he's okay. It seems like he's getting away from Corbell, so that kind of blew up in his face in that regard, so... But Tommy's got all these questions now, and he ends up turning to Burton because it's like, right, his job was to take care of that guy, take him to the sheriff's station, but that's the whole point. Like, right, I believe the only one who knew my route, who knew I even had that guy who ambushed me, it had to be someone from the sheriff's station, so it had to be the sheriff. Also, whoever it is, So he was like, it has to be Corbell's behind all this, which obviously Burton's like, well, of course it is. So I don't know how Corbell's taking that as, I don't know how Burton's taking that as either like Corbell's taking it as like, well, of course he would because the man runs the town. So of course he's going to like, it's like, oh, he's not going to let anything happen in this town without him kind of figuring out what's what. So it's like either like, hey, that's the man trying to go back on our deal, or maybe that's him trying to keep up the deal. I don't know how Burton interpreted that. It could be, because it's unclear, I guess, from Burton's perspective of what Corbell 100% has planned, but he's definitely getting his ass involved in all of this. But Tommy wants to be in the middle of like what's going on, but Burton's like, yeah, you're lucky you got out of this alive. Next time you get ambushed, you won't be so lucky. So, and I guess that's the only reason why Tommy is alive, because it's like either Corbell was like, don't kill the cop, or it's because that was one of the sheriff's deputies and it's like, I'm not going to kill one of my deputies. It's like, Tommy's a good kid. I've known him since he was a kid. So I also was wondering where like the episode title was going to come into play. It's like, it's the sheriff's password. And he got such a kick out of that, explaining it to Corbell, all caps, so... I'm assuming he's going to piece it together that there's something else going on here, considering when he hears Bob's explanation, because he's going to be like, oh, so Bob got the exact call I did. But it's like, once again, by the time he gets back, I doubt Bob killed Mary, but it's hard to say because Bob is Bob. Bob's the proficient killer that he is. So he might kill Mary just to make a point. So Corbell could come back to a travesty type of situation, or maybe actually Bob could be waiting for him because it's like, oh, I'm going to wait for you to come home. I've got the collar around your wife now, so you're going to do what I say. We'll see how that plays out. That's just me making assumptions on that part, on But other than that, I'm curious to see what happens with Tommy. That was kind of something I was curious about before, because he his wife is telling him, let's get out of town, because immediately she was like, oh, we both know who's behind this. I was like, oh, did he? Because did he confide in her about like his suspicions of the chief, the sheriff? But it's like, no, she was talking about Corbell, because it's like nothing terrible happens in this town without that man having a slice of the pie, like having something to do with it. Because it's like, right, he runs the entire town, so it's like if anything bad or shady's happening, that man's at the centerfold of it. And so for D, it's like we can up and leave, but for Tommy, it's like this is his home. He's grown up here, he's worked here his entire life. He doesn't want to like run from this fight, but that's the problem. You're running head first into a fight, you don't even know what's happening. And yes, Flynn wants to fill him in, but Burton's like, no, the less people that knows, the better, because the more Tommy knows, the more Tommy's going to dive deeper into this fight. Because Tommy knows what's what, he's going to want to be a part of this, especially knowing Flynn is a part of it because he cares about her. There's also like, right, I'm just going to do my duty of look after the people of this town, and if a fight like this from the future is finding its way here to present day, then I got to do my thing. But that's also, a good chunk of it will also be because it's about Flynn too, so that's definitely going to be interesting. Another angle to this, we had the whole Connor situation where, we had the opening, which we saw that perspective on things last episode, kind of like Grace ended up showing Alita that whole sequence. Because you did see in a moment, like during the whole conversation, like, oh, let's not do anything about the doll. There was almost like a shift in Connor. And I don't know if that was like some of the Research Institute, like fucking with the stub, causing that to happen, or what? Because obviously, once again, because of the haptic stuff, like the haptic stuff inside of them, they're all connected. So I don't know whether like he was channeling like Leo or something, because they were all saying like, right, we need to do something about it because they can't keep listening to that dog, and it's like horrendous hearing how much it's in pain. And because they were expecting like there's going to be like a shooter or something, but it's like, oh, we haven't like had any gunfight in a while. It's been like quite a few days, over like a dozen days or something like that. So Connor goes, like every time he was clipping the fence, I'm like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. But then like it turns out the actual explosive itself was in the dog's stomach. Now, I don't know if every time he was clipping the fence, he was just kind of expediting the bomb more and more. I think that might have just been for the sound effect of us getting nervous, like, because we know what's going to happen. We know, like, oh, God, it's going to blow up at some point, but then, like, oh. And then he turns the dog over and, like, yeah, surgically had a bomb installed in it, and he gets blown up, so. Because I'm confused, because before they were like, oh, yeah, we had information about the dog ahead of time, but, like, they were talking about it. So I don't know if that was supposed to be a representation of this is this, like in that moment Connor had like a shift that was the stub versus the original timeline. I don't know if that's what that was supposed to be, or like I said, whether or not that was just like the haptic stuff kind of looping into him in that regard. But it seems like he has that nightmare probably pretty frequently. And I love that element, that thing later on where Leon's like, hey, I can either take some of that pain away from you, which the way Leon talked about it, it almost seemed like that was kind of his job in the team. Like, I don't know if that was kind of like the therapeutic, like, I take on shoulder everyone else's pain, or maybe he specifically did that for Connor, but either way, he ends up taking it on, and it's like Connor, like, right after the fact, like him getting, like, about to get performed surgery on, he's, like, looking at his arm blown off and his leg, and he's like, please don't take my leg, so whatever was kind of left of his leg, they ended up having to take it, so. And Leon ended up kind of taking all of it, because it was like either that or hear me singing. I love that he started just like, Connor was like, for fuck's sake, okay, Leon, jeez. You know, so. But talking to, what was the kid's name? Is it Mackin, I think, or something like that? He's one of the dudes that works at the 3D printing place. Well, I love the whole thing of he comes up, he's like, oh, Connor, hey. It's like, they called you over here, didn't they? Why? Are they too scared? He's like, well, yeah. People are too scared, so that's why they kind of did. He's like, are you scared of me? He's like, what? Yeah, I mean, not really. He's like, well, yeah, a little bit. And it's like, yeah, most people are. But Connor's plan is he wants to utilize the headset. He wants to, be inside one of the peripherals permanently. But it's like, yeah, you do that because it's like, yeah, is there a time limit before you get booted out? From what we've seen so far, there doesn't seem to be a time limit. It seems like you could be inside the peripheral as long as, like, I mean, granted, it seems like there are after effects for Flynn. Well, once again, Flynn's circumstances might be a byproduct of what Alita did. Because I think, Asian, and I'm probably butchering his name, but him and Ash, they were discussing it, and it's like, wait, this is like the doctor, the physician that's looking at Flynn. It's like, wait, did Alita? It's like, yeah, through her eyes. So it's like, yeah. So that whatever it is that Dee Dee saw on the scan or whatever, what she thought was kind of bacteria on like her brain or something like that, it's got to be for whatever reason it's manifesting itself like that. God knows why it manifests itself specifically like that. Because the question was like, because even Flynn was like, oh, could it be possible that Alita transferred like whatever it was we stole from the Institute into the stub? And it's like, yeah, it's possible. It's like, yeah, she was able to directly, because she had basically what is the human brain if not essentially like, a organic like computer, it's like those are the parallels of like, your brain is basically a computer, so I guess that's all she needed. Like, once again, this time travel stuff isn't just fully time travel, it's just basically data transfer. So I guess it's like, right, it went from the Institute thing into Alita's eye, like, and it back traced through the peripheral, like through the headset, because the information just basically got downloaded on her, in her, so to say, so to speak. So, and it seems like Ash's conversation earlier, like I was referencing earlier, seems like it's kind of implying like that. So I've been feeling that might be the case for a little while now, and it seems like that's kind of confirming it. But anyway, circling back to the Connor thing really quickly, he wants to have a peripheral. He wants to stay in that, you know? And for him, it's like, yeah, I was in a coma for 8 months. I had an IV hooked up to me. They fed me through a tube. I had a catheter in my penis. And it's like, yeah, I could stay like that. But, you know, Mackin was like, yeah, like, but how much your body would break down. But for him, it's like, I don't care. Like, you know, you're a smart dude, probably one of the smartest dudes in this town. You're saying that you can't imagine what it's like to live in this body. He's like, well, maybe you should try a little harder, and then next time we'll have this conversation, and we'll continue this conversation. He talks to Burton later on. Even Burton compares what he wants to do to basically suicide. It's like, it's no different than like putting a bullet in your head, or just like, you know, suffocating yourself with like a pillow or something like that. It's just a very slow death. And he's like, right, we're all kind of dying from like a slow death to some extent. Like, that's just naturally life. So he's kind of like, whatever I got to do to, because he also talked about like, because Flynn has apparently been making him prosthetics because they gave her like probably some high-tech prosthetics that she's been working on, but he refuses to wear them because, like, regardless of it all, no matter how well they might work, they're still fakes. And he thinks like, right, is it really for my sake you want me to wear the prosthetics, or is it just to make everyone else feel a little easier, being able to see me coming, you know, not having to worry about, like, not having to pity at me as much as like, all right, don't have to feel as bad for me, don't have to feel as uncomfortable around me. So I also love the whole thing, too, of the MF thing. It's like, yeah, my mom thinks it means my friend. And Connor's like, doesn't it? He's like, yeah, motherfucker. I do love the back and forth that they have. But other than that, there's also, the future is a lot more effed up than even Flynn realized. Because basically, there's a lot of AR activated at all time. And I guess, like, the Research Institute does it, and most people are just kind of fine with it. I mean, I guess, like, in this regard, it's like, yeah, it's meant to be, like, it's you know, them testing out a product, but it's also, like, as Wolf kind of puts, it's more of a mood enhancer. Because it's like, yeah, oh, look at all these people around. And they did it, like, 99% of the people left. I want to say, you could see someone on a bench, like, laying down. I think that's the only person, like, everyone else in it, because she was like, why are people avoiding us? Is it kind of like a close contact thing? It's like, well, we know there was like the virus and stuff like that around, but it's like, nope, those people were fake. Then the buildings haven't, like, not all the buildings have been rebuilt. So you wipe that away and it's like, yo, a lot of the buildings are like heavily damaged or dilapidated. So it's like, wow, this world is, and it's like, obviously it's like the entire city's like that. It's like, God forbid if London looks like that. God forbid what the rest, well, we kind of already have an idea about kind of what the state of a certain part of the world is, like where Flynn is from, because it's like, yeah, some nuclear bombs went off and stuff like right there, right? So, as she kind of learned with the jackpot situation, so that was kind of an interesting discovery. I also love the whole situation where they ultimately ended up going to the place where Alita got her peripherals. And they met a dude. One of the people is Reggie, who I didn't immediately recognize him. That's Callum Blue, who one thing you might know him from a certain. He was in Smallville as Zod. I was like, he was a later version of Zod, because obviously Zod initially, one of the times earlier points, I want to say it was season 6 when Zod had possessed like Lex's body. I want to say that was season 6, but like I want to say season 8 might have been the first time Zod. Maybe even season 9. Because season 8's the Doomsday season. So I think Zod was the season 9. It definitely was a season 9 because it was like before the final season. But yeah. Either way, tangent to all that side. It's actually also interesting too, just because it's like, well, there's also like, that was the WB / the CW, but that was like in its first year, maybe. But there's another connection because obviously the actor who plays Connor's like, I want to say it's getting his name Mad Dog from, Riverdale, so it's like just kind of an interesting correlation and comparison to really think about. I don't think I'd mention it up until now. I've been thinking about it the entire time. I just never really bring it up because I forget to bring it up each time. But it just happened to be the perfect segue to talk about it. Either way, I love how Flynn got him to talk. She's like, oh yeah, like, I made this bet with this person that you couldn't do a better job with a peripheral. It's like, yeah, saying that you're kind of past your prime. He's like, my prime? He's like, yeah, before your work started slipping. It's like, yeah, that's the best way to kind of get what you want, is kind of attack someone's ego. And it's like, yeah, said the right things to trigger him later on, being like, oh yeah, could you replace eyes? He's like, yeah, that's pretty easy. What, you want thermal, this and that? She's like, how about replacing it with a human eye? And it's like, okay, I know what this is all about. And I love it goes into a whole fight sequence. And I love that Wilf didn't help. He just stayed behind. And in that moment, he ended up, he helped out a little bit, but he let her, it almost made me think of like the whole Thanos thing. It's like, oh, no. Let him have his fun. You know, it's like, which is like such a, one of those cool badass, like, I mean, it's on the villain side of things, but it's still like a badass, like, villain moment. She's like, no. Let him have his fun. You know? Was it Ebony Maw was the one that said that line? I think it might have been. Either way, putting that aside, but she pretty much gets to work and handles it by herself, which is still pretty dope. Kind of letting her flex her muscles a little bit. And I love when it came to the last person, just the guy, Reggie was like, all right, Abby, enough before you get us killed. And so it turns out, we find out that Alita is apparently a neoprim, which apparently Wilf didn't know that. It's like, how did, like, I didn't know that was something you could, well, because I guess most neoprims are like, family orientated, aren't they? I like Lev's situation is like, right, because it's a family thing, isn't it? Like, it's just kind of something he got from his family, so because they are, obviously in turn makes him one, but it's like, I guess you can rise to the status of a neoprim or something like that. So it's like, because he says like only a neoprim would know classics, something like, hey, a scalpel and surgery, like that's, I guess, is such old technology at this point in time. It's such antiquated that it's like no one other than neoprim would know about that, because I guess it's like such retro technology, it's harder to track, and like no one would really know about that except for neoprims who probably have like maybe access to like older knowledge or something like that. Maybe that's what that's supposed to be in reference to, but Wilf claims to not have known about Alita's circumstances, so that's really interesting. I did think it was interesting too that Flynn did ask, like, right, does Alita know what you did? And he never really gave her an answer about the whole boarding school situation when it was taken over, when he talked about it last episode. So, but probably like the biggest surprise in this episode was Inspector Lowbeer, as they she's from the Metropolitan Police, and apparently, I guess all inspectors kind of have this like thing where it's like, oh yeah, they kind of know everything. It's like not like an omnipotent thing, but they just have a special gift of just knowing things. Like, I don't know whether their mind is able to just take everything that they know and just decipher it in a matter of moments, and just because it seems like they have like this real, almost like real time play by play of how things will play out. You know, because he was like, oh, I know that Lev is here. I also know that Wilf is here. I even asking for Wilf by name. And it's like, right. So this is what's going to happen if you ask for representation. This is all going to fall on Wilf. And then Wilf, I'm going to use him. You know, it's like, right. He's not the big, I'm going to use a small fish to get a big fish. And I'm sorry if it makes you feel a certain way, Wilf, but that's just what it is. You're not kind of that big of a prize. You're not that big of a catch. So basically saying that Wilf will be in a situation where, because it's like, right, the whole situation that went down with Charisse like a couple episodes ago, where she ended up having to kill Daniel so he wouldn't run his mouth. It's like, right, he was caught at that crime scene, so it's like, right, we need to figure out why that was. I need you to be honest with me. So it seems like they kind of told, it's like, right, there's no point in lying, because lying, in fact, is going to make things worse. So she already knows a lot, and she probably can already tell when you're lying too, so no point in lying. So they kind of tell her how much of the truth they ended up telling her. I mean, they weren't going to lie, but how much of what, like, did they tell her all? They said enough to bring up Stubbs, and I thought it was interesting. I mean, I love, like, the manner in which she talks to, because she's just so very, like, oh, I'm smarter than you and I'm better than you, but also just, like, because she can back it up. It's not just words. It's like, I I forgot what she had said. She had said something, and then she was like, "Oh, Beatrix, like, isn't it your point to kind of keep me on par?" She was like, "No, you're basically on a roll." I felt like it'd be rude to interrupt because she had basically combined so many metaphors. She had used a fishing metaphor, a thread metaphor. But yeah, find out about the stub, and that led to an interesting conversation where she was like, "Why would you call it a stub? That's such a nasty name." And Ash says, "Imperialism." It's like, right. To make us feel better about what we're doing, we're treating these stubs like they are third world countries. Because it's the whole conversation of, well, these are, the choices we make. He's like, simply enough, it's just a thing of the choices we make end up making, things splinter out into a stub. And it is its own continuous timeline. So, but we're not really concerned about it because, right, we can do whatever we want to in the stub because, once again, they don't matter. That's the point that Grace was kind of making. That's a point that Lev has made as well. It's the continued view of, like, we can do whatever we want to them because, well, some version of these characters are already dead because the past of our timeline has already happened, so it doesn't mean anything. They're already dead, there's no point. But this version of them that exists in a stub, like, they're already dead in our timeline. So we're basically dealing with dolls at this point in time. That's how they are viewed, which I think is an interesting parallel considering what we learned about Alita and how, like, dolls, like, help her kind of better understand people. So it's an interesting parallel. And I guess that's kind of even more so the parallel. I think I talked about that a little bit last episode of kind of like that. Maybe I didn't quite get into the parallels of it because I didn't maybe really think about it at the time. I don't know. I know I touched on the doll thing, but I don't know if I necessarily equated that with the whole stub situation. So, but the inspector, she does want to meet with the three peripherals that are there. So ends up summoning Connor, Burton, and Flynn. And it's like, obviously for Burton and well, technically it's Connor's second time, but for Burton it's his first time. And so it's like, right, all three of them getting to be here all at once is going to be pretty wild. And obviously they're meeting with the inspector, and where that conversation and where all of that takes us, we'll ultimately have to wait to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.